Hello and welcome to another video, and this is my attempt to try and make it look Christmassy. My daughter see that earlier and she said they're going to think you're the child catcher out of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. That's the confidence you need when you're trying to do this, isn't it really? But hope you like the Syndicate original jumper. It's actually really comfy, and also they sent a little card thing with it. I don't know, absolutely brilliant. I do love old Life of Tom and Andy the Gardener and all them lot. This isn't an advert, by the way, just one of the favourite things I like to watch. So anyway, we are looking at a Christmas ghost, but I want to talk about Christmas ghosts and ghost stories, because you got to blame the Victorians, right? So the Victorians, they love nothing better than telling a good old ghost story around Christmas, and it's become a tradition that we've sort of carried on over the years, and until only recently the BBC used to do ghost stories on Christmas Eve, and I haven't seen if they can do one this year, but they always used to do it, and like some version of Scrooge or something like that. But generally it was a traditional thing that the BBC did, but that was taken from the Victorians. So the Victorians really started to embrace Christmas, and a part of that was for families to gather on Christmas Eve and to tell tales, and these were generally ghost stories or spooky stories. And this explains why there are so many ghost stories around Christmas. But we've got to say, it also muddies the water when we come up for the true ghost stories. So a lot of them were made up that then fell into a reported true story. Today's one probably falls in that, well, actually, you know what, all the ones you're going to get over Christmas are probably going to fall into that category of that word flimsical that I use, evidence of it being real. So it's Christmas, enjoy yourself. I hope you'll enjoy this story. I like it, and it's a little bit of a sentimental one as well. But before we do that, let me just say again, thank you so much for people doing the buy me a coffee. Blow me away. Perhaps I should do it as buy me a car, but no, your support is incredible. Thank you for all your comments below. Been a bit slow trying to catch up with them this week, mainly because I've just been trying to get content for the Christmas ones. It wasn't something I was planning on doing, so I've ended up deep diving through my files, through books and all that, to try and find some good ghost stories. This one that I'm going to cover today, I've known for some time, but again, thank you for your support, and if you don't mind doing a hype, a share, like and all that to support me, it'd be brilliant, and comment below what you think of the video. From what I understand, this story of old Stanley dates back to around about 1860, and we don't really have a proper time frame of when it happened, but my guess it will be from about 1790 up until about 1840, so quite a long time frame. I know the story quite well, and I don't know what way is the best way to start telling it, apart from this story was told around Christmas tables and in old pubs up and down the north. And I guess the main place we're looking at is Balderstone and the Castle Inn. Balderstone is just outside Sheffield, and it's quite a small village. Back then in like the 19th century, it had around about 1,500 people living there, so probably a little bit more busier than it is now. So it was quite a thriving little community. Every Christmas this story got told in the pub about a old resident called Stanley, old Stanley. But I'm going to take you back to the other side. I'm going to take you right away over to the east coast to pick up where Stanley is later on in life. It's one August day, a farmer just outside of Skegness is working the land when he looks up and he sees a gentleman walking over to him. And the gentleman says to him, "Have you got any work?" And the farmer's like, "Well, yeah, actually I do have quite a lot of work, and would you like to come and work for me?" They agree a little deal. Bizarrely, the deal is that this gentleman, Stanley, would work on the land for free, but in return he would get a meal a day and would be able to use a barn on the land as somewhere to live. I'm guessing the barn wasn't full of hay, because they say that he had a comfortable living conditions. But over the next few months, Stanley lived there. Comes to Christmas, and Stanley approaches the farmer and says that he's really enjoyed living there and that he'd like to carry on doing it over the next year. But he asks the farmer for a favour, and the farmer is sort of like a little bit suspicious, And Stanley says that he is going on a trip over Christmas, but would he be able to have a sheep? Now the farmer, a little bit confused by this, and Stanley explains that he will trade the sheep on the route where he is going, and it will see him through his journey. The farmer said, absolutely fine. You've been a really good worker, and good luck with you. And the farmer and his wife make a little package for him to go on this journey. Now this journey Stanley takes is around about 100 miles from Skegness up to Balderston. As Stanley crossed the country, the sheep followed with him. They go through village by village, and again the sheep was still there. Then it gets to 2 villages just outside of Balderston. Stanley would trade the sheep for 2 dead geese. He would then turn up at the Crown Inn on Christmas Eve and hand over 2 geese to the innkeeper, and he would then sit in the corner, have a drink, then leave the pub and walk round to a field that's slightly up on a hill. He'd walk up onto that field and he'd stay there for around about an hour, 2 hours, and then he would disappear. Stanley done this trip for 20 years. For 20 years he worked on that farm. Every Christmas he would get a little care package from the farmer's wife. He would trot off with a sheep, go right across the land, go into the castle inn, give them 2 geese, would sit in the corner, have his beer, then leave the pub and go up onto this field that is just an empty field. There's nothing there, and locals started thinking that maybe he was like looking over at the view or something like that, but they could never really work out what he'd done. Locals had gone up there and searched that land, and there was nothing up there for him to be looking for. But for 20 years he'd done this, and during that time he become to look a little bit like, well, modern people. When last time I heard someone say this story, they described him as a Gandalf type figure. So from Lord of the Rings, that's based on the fact that Stanley never shaved, and he ended up with this great big long beard, and he would walk with a shepherd's crook. Now when I think of the old shepherd's crook, I always think of like Joseph and Mary, and it goes back to the old school plays where you always had to be, one had to be the shepherd, and I always ended up being the shepherd for some reason with the shepherd's crook and all that. But Stanley used to walk along with this big shepherd's crook. Now say for 20 years he'd done this. One of the strange facts about this is that none ever see Stanley returning back to the farm. Yet he would turn up a few days after Christmas back on the farm ready to work. Let's say this carried on for 20 years. So it was a regular thing. Everyone knew him as Old Stanley. All the little villages that he had visited along the way were all expecting him at certain times of the year, and he was like clockwork, a bit like the old Leatherman over in America, who walked along a trail and everyone could set their clock by him. So very much like that sort of mythical legend, he would make this journey no problems. His health was pretty good. And this is one of the bizarre things, because everyone used to call him Old Stanley, but no one actually knew how old he was. He just looked old, but he was very agile and quite a fast walker. One year, Stanley fails to return to the farm, and the farmer is a little bit concerned, but as time goes on, he thought that if anything's happened to him, he would know about it, and maybe he's just decided to move on. The barn that Stanley used to sleep in has been turned back into farm use, so there's no evidence of him ever being there. So no one really knows where Stanley has gone. But Christmas comes along, Christmas Eve, the pub door opens, Stanley walks in and puts 2 geese down on the counter, goes over, sits down in the corner, gets his beer. Again, this carries on for the next few years. Over the time that Stanley has been travelling to this pub, the owners have changed, but they've all got used to Stanley coming in, not really talking to anybody, just putting these 2 geese down on the counter, expecting this beer, and then go and sit in the corner. And the locals were totally used to this. Took a little bit used to for the new landlord, but the agreement was there, and it was always set in stone that Stanley would swap these geese for a beer, only 1 beer, and then he would go. I think that's a really good deal for the landlord, getting 2 geese right on Christmas Eve. So yeah, it'd cost you a lot more than that today. But one year, Stanley leaves the shepherd's crook in the pub, and he leaves it in the corner where he normally sits. during that period of the year, locals there who see Stanley as their local legend take the shepherd's crook and they put it up on the wall in the pub, and expecting that Christmas Eve Stanley would come there and collect the shepherd's crook. They sort of forget about it. Christmas Eve comes, the door opens, Stanley walks in, but he hasn't got no geese with him. He goes, sits in the corner, doesn't ask for beer, he's only there for about 5 minutes, gets up, walks out and goes up to the field. Now unfortunately, during that time when he'd done that, there was no local people in the inn. The barmaid that was working there didn't really know that this was a thing. It was only after, when she said that something weird had happened, that this gentleman walked in, sat in the corner, got up and left, that people turned around and said, well, that's Stanley, you described Stanley. Didn't he give you no geese or anything like that? And she said no, he was empty-handed, he didn't have nothing with him. She goes, he just sat in the corner for about 5 minutes and got up and left. And she goes, I looked out and he was walking up over the fence, which is where the field is that Stanley always stood at. In August that year, a farmer comes along and he's with his brother. His brother walks into the Castle Inn and stops dead. And he goes, that crook up on the wall, goes, that's mine. He goes, what do you mean it's yours? He goes, I gave that to an old guy that used to work on my farm. He goes, and then he just disappeared. And one of the locals turned around and said, that's Stanley's hook. He goes, he comes in here every Christmas Eve, sits in the corner, brings up us 2 geese, and that is where the farmer explains what Stanley used to do. Standing in the barn, taking a sheep, would trade it for 2 geese, but Stanley never explained to the farmer after that point what had happened. And they said, yeah, he used to come there, give us 2 geese, as a beer, then goes over into the field. Bit of a mystery. Then the farmer turns around and says that Stanley disappeared 5 years ago. And they don't know where he's staying. He's got to be staying somewhere because he's still come in over that period of time. But last Christmas he didn't come in with any geese. So okay, so he's fallen on hard times. And they go, okay, well perhaps we need to go and find Stanley. One of the locals joins the farmers and they go through the villages back to Skegness. They get to one of the first villages Stanley would have visited, leaving Skegness, heading over to Bolston, when the description they give triggers somebody's memory. And it's not a great memory. A few days before Christmas, 5 years ago, they found a gentleman just outside of the village, laying motionless on the floor. Unfortunately, this gentleman had passed away. All the locals recognised him as Old Stanley, and he was this gentleman that used to pass through that village for 20 years. The local from the Castle Inn is really shocked. He goes, well, this can't be right, because Stanley, apart from last year, has been coming to that pub every Christmas Eve and dropping off 2 geese. He goes, yeah, well, we know where he used to get the geese from. That was the farm he used to get to the day before he gets to Balderston. So, like little investigators, they trot off over to this other farm. Now, we are talking about a long distance. This is 100 miles, so nothing of this is happening quick back then. Now, they are either riding on a horse or they're walking. We don't really get a description of their travel plans. They arrived at this farm and they tell the farmer why they're there. And the farmer says that yes, Stanley always used to come here and collect 2 geese, but for about the last 5-6 years he has not been coming to the farm. He goes, but the strange thing is, Stanley used to get here the day before Christmas Eve, and he used to get here around about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and Stanley would bang on the door with big old shepherd's crook. The farmer would answer the door, and after this period of time he already had the geese ready for him. But over the last 5 years he was still here, that banging on the door with this shepherd's crook, open up the door and nobody was there. You can see where this is leading now. But the hunt for Stanley's identity and the hunt for his remains sort of like intensified. They travelled back to the other village, which is just outside the gentleman's farm that he owns in Skegness. They turn around and say that his body was collected by a family member of Stanley's and it was taken away to be buried. So Stanley still had some family that were in contact with him. So they set about trying to track this family down. Despite all their efforts, they could never track down this family member that had collected Stanley's body. It came up with its own little legend about what actually happened to Stanley, and it just added more of a legend to who Stanley was. They will come to find out Stanley's history. Then it comes to Christmas time again, and the Castle Inn is surrounded by deep snow. The weather outside is absolutely horrendous. It is blizzard conditions, and it is Christmas Eve. It's lunchtime, the time that Stanley would always walk through that door. Inside the inn, there's a few local people now. The door blows open, and Stanley's crook that is up on the wall falls down onto the floor. This is the first year that Stanley has not turned up in any shape or form in that inn. The locals, knowing that the mystery around him that Stanley has passed away, were a little bit jumped by the crook falling down, and wondered, with the door blown open and the crook falling down, that this was Stanley entering the inn in his ghostly form. Come the springtime, all the land was clear of snow, and the farmers in the local area got to work. This year they wanted to extend a bit of their land. This is actually the hillside that Stanley would stand on, and they started to plough it. They unearthed the answers to Stanley's life. Whilst they were ploughing, they hit a big rock. They got out to move the rock to one side. When they looked at it, it had engravings on it, and it was dedicated to a 1-year-old child called Anna. The last name was barely readable, and it read something like Hodgard, and that name is changed over the years from Hodgard to Hegraves to all different forms, but we're sticking with Hodgard because that ties in with what they find out later on. With this stone they're looking at, they think, well, maybe we need to dig a little bit deeper, literally into the ground, to see if there's actually a body there. And they do. They find this skeleton of this young child. The vicar comes along and gives it a proper burial. Now, the church there has got a bit of a history as well, which may explain why the child was buried there and not in the churchyard. But over the next few months, with a last name and a first name of this child, they were able to track down the history of the family and who Stanley was. And appropriately, they gathered a few local people in the Castle Inn on Christmas Eve to tell them the story. And it's quite a sad story. Stanley had met a lady in a village just the other side of Balderston. And I keep saying Balderston. I struggle with the name, okay? Now, give me a break. But Stanley met this young lady. Stanley was only 20 when this happened. Stanley fell in love. Him and this lady had a young child. The lady died in childbirth, which is unfortunately quite common back then. The child only lived a year. Now, why was the child buried in that field? Well, the churchyard in around about 1795 had fallen into disrepair, and the chapel itself was falling apart. And in that period of time, it was being rebuilt. There's a good chance that Stanley didn't want to take his child into that church because it was, at the time, people thought it was going to be knocked down. But it is said that Stanley and his wife met, and they used to go up onto that field, and that is where he used to stand and look over the view, because this area of land is one of the highest. It's 1,000 foot above sea level, so you've got a great view over the area, and it was the best place for him to bury his daughter that he would remember, and a place that his wife would know. So then it became very obvious what Stanley was doing. Stanley was only 21 when he went to work on that farm in Skegness. Now, the farmer believed him to be a lot older, so I'm guessing he had a very weathered features. But that only makes him in his early 40s by the time he passed away. But yet, people used to call him Old Stanley. So I don't know if that's, again, plays into that old weathered features and the long grey beard. But people did age a lot quicker back then because of the harsh conditions that they lived in. Now, the date on the stone that the farmers found was the 24th of December. So we know that the child passed away on the 24th of December. For 20 years, Stanley would make that journey from Skegness over to that hillside to be with his daughter, which is quite a loving thing, but quite a sad thing. But what about the presence of Stanley still turning up in that pub for 5 years after he passed away that can't be accounted for? And yet they found out that it was a solid date that Stanley had died. It was definitely 5 years that Stanley had been coming in after he had meant to have died, coming into that pub. It makes for a great ghost story that for 5 years the ghost of Stanley would walk into that pub, pass over these geese and take a pint and go and sit in the corner. How you explain with people interacting with these geese that are from a ghost, we don't know. But Victorians didn't really think about that when they were telling their ghost stories. But you have it that Stanley, 5 years after he passed away, continued to turn up at the Castle Inn with 2 geese, hand them to the barmaid, sit down in the corner, drink his drink, get out and go up and pay tribute to his daughter in the field. As I say, it's quite a sad story, but quite a lovely story at the same time. But it doesn't end now. So for the next 40 years, the ghost of Stanley is meant to be seen walking that track from Skegness up to that pub. A very long journey, and of course is only seen around Christmas time. People in that pub for the next 20 years would always put out a pint in the corner of that pub for Stanley to come in. They would say around about midday on Christmas Eve that the crook on the side of the wall would always fall over, or the door would always blow open, and as a collective the people in that pub would turn around and say, "Hello, Stanley." And it become a bit of a tradition that if that door ever opened up and nobody come through it, they'd say that Stanley had turned up for a pint, which again is quite a lovely story. There is one circumstances where Stanley may have reacted a little bit different, and again this is Christmas Eve. He's fixed snow. The farmer has done all the land over on the other side now. It's been worked on and it's been left alone over winter. That farmer is in the pub. He walks out and he's walking past his land. He looks up and he sees a figure standing on that hillside. And he's trying to work it out. The snow has come down really heavy. He climbs over a wall and starts walking up to the hillside, knowing in his mind that Stanley used to visit this location. Just so I got to this point in the story, the church bells at my local church, St Margaret's, have just started ringing. They do bell practice there, and I find it such a lovely sound to hear. It reminds me that this used to be a village and has a long history, and yet I can still hear the church bells even though we've got motorway traffic, manway traffic and pool traffic going past. It just reminds me that history is all around us if we take that moment to look. But this farmer walks up to this figure on the hill. He doesn't get a nice reception. He describes this bloke wearing very tatty clothing and a long grey beard, and his head is covered in snow. He turns around to face the farmer. The farmer describes an horrific scene. That this figure has no eyes, that all the skin is sunken in on his face. And as he staggers back in shock, this figure lurches right away up to him and passes through him. The farmer feels this dense cold through his chest and collapses on the floor. He looks up to see that this figure has completely disappeared, and knowing that where the figure has been standing, there's no marks in the snow, no footprints. That farmer quickly comes to the conclusion that that was the ghost of Stanley, and Stanley was angry at him because he'd been the one to disturb his daughter's grave. It is said that farmer went back, dug up the skeleton at the church and buried it back in that land and put the stone slab back over the top. Again, a lovely end to the story. And again, no, Victorians, they used to love all these sort of stories, and we do. We still love all these little ghost stories. And I guess, yes, we don't get the winter weather now that they used to years ago with the old climate stuff and all that. But even back then, you didn't really get the white Christmases that we'll associate with these Victorian stuff. Yes, it was more common, but it didn't always happen. Charles Dickens really put into folklore and myths and legends that snow always happened at Christmas. It is nice if you do get white Christmas, but I think here the closest we come was about 96. I think we had snow on Boxing Day, so it's probably the closest we've had. We did have a few years ago, we had snow that was still on the ground at Christmas, and I took a photo of my daughter posting a letter to Father Christmas in the snow, and it looked lovely. So if I find it, I'll stick on it. She was really, really young back then. But just to round this off, I will say that over the last sort of 10 years, people have contacted the Castle Inn and they have no knowledge of this ghost story. So it's quite ironic, really. But as I say, traditions are lost, folklore is lost, and unless it's kept alive, that people don't know about it. One of my local pubs, when we done our investigation now, and the history was that the landlord had killed the daughter down the stairs, no one knew about it until we'd done that investigation. And I dug in the history of it, found these police records and the court case and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, it was a true fact. And that it was a true fact. And these reports of this lady haunting that pub for many years after, it'd all been forgotten. It's not till you bring this history back up. And I guess it's why the guy, I will say my last video, the gentleman phoned me about 5 minutes after I uploaded the last video. And I was like, oh no, you ain't going to be happy. He's going to moan about something I've done in the video. He wasn't. But he told me a lot more history about that building. And he said that he probably wouldn't have let me go in there because he didn't want to upset the lady. Everything had calmed down. He did have issues with his son in there originally, and he kept waking up at a certain time. And that his father-in-law believed that one of the rooms down there was haunted, happened to be a toilet. And he found it happened to be a toilet, and he found it really uncomfortable in there. But he was worried that me going in there and doing an investigation or talking about it could make this spirit restless and could cause trouble. And he believed that the spirit in there didn't like new people. So when new people moved into that building, it took time for them to get used to it. But again, this all fits into a lot of our old history ghost stories. I've got quite a few of these Victorian type ghost stories for you. I'm going to try and get as many as I can out over Christmas. I'll try and stick, I will definitely stick to the Tuesdays and Fridays. But if I can, I'll try to drop some bonus episodes in there. They may be shorter, but again, thank you for all your support. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, comment. I don't know what happened to my subscriptions last time. I lost 15 subscribers on my last video. It was that just because I put a photo up of Katie Hopkins in the video. It was a joke, okay? It was a joke. People took that way too serious, okay? It was a joke. So just calm down. Yeah, it's Christmas. Be happy, be cheerful. So hope you like my decorations. And Andy and Tom, if you ever see this video, this jumper is really comfortable. I've got to say, it's a bit hot to wear indoors all the time. But yeah, I was a bit worried it'd be a bit scratchy, but it's not. It's so comfortable. And again, this is not an advert, okay? This is just from Life of Tom's channel that I like, and him and his sister do these clothing lines that I really like. This is my wife's jumper. Okay, we can only afford one jumper, so we got it for my wife so she can use it when she's working. But I've nicked it for my video. So anyway, hope you enjoy this video, and I'll see you in the next one. So this one comes out on Friday, and I'm going to try and put some more out over the period of time, but if not, I'll definitely see you on Tuesday. Take care. Bye.